What's up, everybody? This is your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga, here to bring you another video with no frills, just the analysis. And today I'm here to bring you the episode 3 review of Attack on Titan entitled A Dimming Light in Despair. First off, let me just say this. This was a pretty slow episode. It was certainly a decrease in pace, shall we say, compared to the high octane first two episodes, and that was to be expected to a certain extent because the story in the current timeline doesn't really pick up until after the time skip. So the first two episodes really function as a prologue to the series, and so now after the time skip we have to do exposition and setup pretty much all over again. So that's partially why this episode was a little bit slower than the first two episodes. Alright, so now on to the summary and analysis. Basic summary of this episode, like I said before, we have a time skip, and Eren, Mikasa, and Armin have all grown up, and it looks like, I'm not really a good estimator when it comes to time, but it looks like at least 4 years have passed, minimally. It looks like at least 4 years have passed. So they're now old enough to join the Corps, and so this episode was pretty much all about their initiation into the Army Corps. And it was basically about Eren struggling to master the 3D maneuver gear. And as it should be evident, mastering the 3D maneuver gear is a necessary part of basic training. It's basically what keeps you alive when you fight against the Titans. Because if you don't have mastery of the 3D maneuver gear, then it's automatically game over. You're gonna die. There's no way around that. So Eren repeatedly fails. But then they find out the reason why he's failing his mastery of the 3D maneuver gear is because the equipment that he's been given is in some way defective. To be brief, none of this is really important. But there are some very important things that happen in this episode, and if you weren't quite paying attention, you might have missed it, because there was some very important subtext and undertones to what was happening on the surface, which is that Eren was struggling with mastering the 3D maneuver gear. Alright, so first I want to talk about the process of being initiated into the Army Corps. So anybody who knows anything about the Army knows that an important aspect of being initiated into the Army and an important component of basic training is sort of stripping away your identity and rebuilding your personality to fit the mold or the image that the Army needs you to have, so that you will be effective and you'll be proficient at what it is the Army needs you to do. So one of the things they do is they make you more interdependent. They emphasize social cohesion, working as a unit, working as a team, working as a group. Another thing they do is they instill a respect for authority and a respect for the chain of command. And this is pretty much what we're seeing in this episode. But what was interesting is that I actually forget the guy's name who's responsible for basic training. There's so many characters and so many characters who die that it's very hard to keep up with these characters' names. But in any event, there was a commander or general, lieutenant, whatever he was, who was sort of walking around basic training, and he was explaining what was happening to the person he was walking with, and he was sort of commentating on what was going on. And that commander basically said this. He says what we have to do is we have to erase their identities, the people who are in basic training, and then rebuild them in our image. And like I said, this makes perfect sense. So what do they need to do? Well, they need to do two things. The first thing they need to do is to get rid of the complacency that all of these, well, not all, but a lot of these guys in basic training have. So like I mentioned in my previous videos about the way that the society is structured in the Attack on Titan world, people in the outer walls who are ostracized, looked down upon, who are part of the lower classes, they're pretty much bred for complacency. And society teaches them not to take the Titans seriously as a threat, which was a major reason why they were so ill prepared in the first and second episodes. And the reason why this complacency is necessary for the people in the inner walls, the higher ups in society, is because it's easier to oppress and take advantage of people who are complacent. And it also helps to feed these people's delusions and fantasies of denial, because nobody wants to take seriously the threat of the Titans. And it's always, like they say, it's blissful ignorance. Ignorance is bliss. And like I said, this applies for the most part to the people on the outer walls. And if you haven't figured it out, those are mostly the people who are in the Titan in the Army Corps and in basic training, because nobody who's in the cushy inner wall wants to go out and be a part of the recon corps to fight the Titans. The second thing is important for basic training to sort of get rid of in these characters is that livestock mentality that Eren has spoken about this in sort of narrative overtones throughout the series, and I've also mentioned this, and a lot of you have also noticed this as well. The army has to get rid of this livestock mentality. And just like it in society instills complacency in a lot of these characters, it also instills this livestock mentality within the citizens. And if you live your life like a caged animal, then you can't develop the tools, or it'll be very difficult for you to develop the tools that will make you proactive. Because when you're in a stressful situation, you're in a life or death situation, you have to be proactive. You can't be reactive. And if you have that livestock mentality, you'll be reactive as opposed to proactive. In the army, all about being proactive. Recon Corps, all about being proactive. You have to go outside the walls of society and basically scout the Titans, look for the Titans. So you're putting yourself right in the pathway of danger. And you have to be able to make split-second decisions. So like I said, all of these things are important aspects of how the people in the outer walls are being oppressed by the people in the inner walls. This complacency and this livestock mentality. And a perfect example of this sort of mentality that we see is when the commander asks someone why they wanted to join the army. And the kid, and we have to also remember that a big component of the army made up of pretty much kids. They're basically child soldiers. In fact, I can't remember any adults joining basic training now that I think back on the episode. So these are all children. And the kid responds, because I want to go to the interior. All right, so for those of you who don't know the structure of the army has three parts. First part is recon. Those are the people who go outside the walls and gather scouting information on the Titans. Second part are the people who are inside the walls, who are responsible for the defense of the walls. The third part of the army is the sort of royal court guard. Those are the people who are tasked with protecting the king and protecting the seat of government, which is basically in the center of everything. It's right in the middle of Wall Shayna. So if you get a cushy job in the interior, having to guard the king, then your chances of being killed by a Titan in actual combat decrease dramatically. So that's basically why the kid says, I want to go to the interior. And you just have some people like that who never get rid of their complacency, who never get rid of their livestock mentality, and only join the army so that they can go to the interior where the king is and be protected and basically take advantage of the corruption that goes on there. So that's a pretty good deal. Join the army, go through basic training, get stationed in the interior, get money, protection, power, everything's all good. And this is pretty much another subtle way of the writer saying that the people in the inner wall are parasites. They're parasites thriving off of the work of the people in the outer walls. They basically live at these people's expenses. And this was mentioned, I think, in episode 1, where they talked about how the walls were designed in such a way that they put pockets of villages or towns to bait the titans, to keep them away from attacking the walls. So these are people who use other humans as fishing bait. But here's the irony and the sort of contradiction of this situation. And it's important that people recognize precisely what's happening here. On one hand, the people who are in control of everything, the higher ups, the higher class, they need people to be complacent to keep this sort of classist system in place. So they need them to be complacent. They need the people in the outer walls to continue to have this livestock mentality. But on the other hand, they really do need an army that doesn't tolerate this kind of attitude. So you can start to see the tension here. And the commander points sort of is attuned to this irony in this situation. And that's why the person who was commentating on the basic training, one of the generals or commanders who was commentating on the basic training, said, look how he only singles out the people who did not experience Shiganshina. Everybody else who experienced it, they already had this attitude where they were divested of their complacency and divested of this livestock mentality. So you can start to see that sort of irony and contradiction and tension going on between how the higher ups need people to be complacent and need to continue to foster this livestock mentality, but on the other hand, they really do need an army to protect them. Also, another important thing that happened in this episode, we learned about the quote-unquote landfill. And we learned what happens to people who don't pass muster at basic training. And the soldiers who drop out, they are sent to what's known as the landfill. And their job is to pick up rocks and pull out weeds. Presumably, their job is to make the land suitable for farming. Because like I said, they actually, in the time skip, it's not clear if the food shortage was ever alleviated, but I imagine that it wasn't. And the reason why I say that is because they have lost a considerable amount of their territory to the Titan invasion. And it's not easy, not even in a span of 4 to 5 years, to get food production up to a capacity where you're able to feed everybody. So I'm still assuming that they're right on the verge of starving. And you can see this by people who, basically, the people in the army, the only thing they get to eat is boiled potatoes and bread. So you don't pass muster in basic training, they send you to the landfill to do farming. But I do have a couple of questions about the landfill. I want to know, besides the people who don't pass basic training, who else is in the landfill? And of course, I wouldn't be surprised if it was only the people who are considered to be the dregs of society. I want to know, does the inner wall have a landfill? Or what kind of jobs do the people in the inner wall do? I know the seat of government is there, but I would really like to know the structure of the economy of this society. I'm just curious. Is it a barter system? Is it based on money? Are the people inside Wall Shina, are they all farming? I just would like to know the distribution of labor, because that would the economic system will also help me understand better the class structure of that society. We know it's based on class, and we know there's some segregation involved, but we're not quite clear on the economic setup between the inner wall and the outer wall. Also, another important thing that was sort of explored in this episode was the opposition, or not necessarily the opposition, but the difference in the characterization between Eren and Armin. So like I've been telling you all along, you should notice by now that the human versus human interaction is as important as the human versus Titan conflict. And one way this gets expressed is through the sort of opposing or different characterization of Armin on one hand and Eren on the other. So we get introduced to Berthold and Reiner, and those people who know the manga know how important Berthold and Reiner are. But Armin and Eren were talking to Berthold and Reiner, who are also two other people going through basic training. And Berthold asks Armin why he became a soldier. And Armin pretty much confirms what everybody suspected, at least what I expected, which is that the government sent 250,000 people to be eaten by Titans. And although Armin doesn't come out and say why, it's pretty clear why they sent those 250,000 people to be eaten. And the reason is because they needed to have those people killed off because they didn't have enough food to feed them. But anywho, Armin says he joined the army because he couldn't sit back and do nothing while the government sent all these people to be killed. And so he wants to join the army so he can potentially make a difference and save some people who aren't suited to be soldiers from going off and being eaten and killed by the Titans. So we see that this is a major difference between Armin versus Eren in terms of their outlook, their worldview, and their motivations for joining the army. Armin potentially understands the social implications or has a far deeper appreciation of the social implications of the human versus human interaction as opposed to Eren. So Armin understands the politics and the economics of what's going on. Eren, on the other hand, he's just pathologically obsessed with killing all the Titans. He just wants them exterminated, wants them all killed. And of course, this is understandable after what happened. But this makes him blind, pretty much, to everything else. And we never really see any instances where Eren is interested in anything other than killing Titans. And it's almost his obsession is so pathological that it's almost to the point where it seems like he doesn't even care anymore about saving humanity. He's just interested in revenge. And this is interesting because it sets Eren up as a character, as an anti-hero rather than a straightforward hero protagonist. He's more of an anti-hero because his goals, his motivations, they're not virtuous in the traditional sense. He's just after revenge. And him killing the Titans will just happen to save humanity as a side effect. So it's interesting that he's set up as the sort of anti-hero protagonist of the series. Also, one other important thing about Eren's characterization that I sort of got a hint of and I never really thought about before, but it seems like Eren has some sort of inferiority complex. And we saw this when he was struggling to master the 3D maneuver gear. And Eren claimed, well, before that, before he was struggling with the 3D maneuver gear, he claimed boldly that anybody who doesn't have any talent is useless. They have no place in the army. And so it was sort of ironic when he started to struggle and he started failing at mastering the 3D maneuver gear and people started training them. I mean, not training, teasing him. And then finally, when they find out his equipment is defective and it's shown how he's able to master the 3D maneuver gear, he looks at Mikasa. And this happens in his mind. He never vocalizes this. He never says this out loud. But he says to himself in his mind, "Look, Mikasa, you don't have to baby me anymore." So it seems like he really needs Mikasa's approval to validate himself. And that to me is a hallmark. When you have to search for validation from the people around you to build up your own self-esteem or to validate your own self, that's a hallmark of an inferiority complex. So I think that's a very interesting component of his characterization. And if I remember correctly, I'm not sure if it was that blunt in the manga, that was a part of his psychology. I'd be interested to see if they explore this aspect of his character further, or in what direction they'll take it. Other thoughts on this episode? Of course, Mikasa is beautiful. She's beautiful. The like I said before, Hajime Isayama's artwork is just so terrible. He's below average in every aspect of drawing. So Mikasa never looks as beautiful in the manga as she does as in the anime. She's absolutely beautiful. Also, we saw a little bit of the 3D maneuver gear in action at the end of this episode, and like I've been saying since the beginning, it looks absolutely beast, and I cannot wait. I cannot wait until we get some more Titan action. Also, Sasha Browse. I love Sasha. Perennial comic relief character. Who can look over Sasha eating that boiled potato, stealing bread? I love Sasha Browse. And it's nice to have comic relief characters like Sasha, because this series is so incredibly depressing. So we need characters like Sasha to bring up our spirits a little bit. Also, final thing. I went back and sort of looked over the earlier chapters of the manga, and I was surprised to realize that the action is going to pick up almost immediately. So my prediction is within the next 1 to 2 episodes, probably at the end of the next episode, there will be a considerable amount of Titan action for a long time into the foreseeable future. So you know I'm excited about that. So that's pretty much it for this episode review. This was your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga. Just brought you another video with no frills, just the analysis. Peace and have a blessed day.